All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Chav Tes. We are going to be learning more about the effects of the sunlight on a cloudy day. And the Gemara is going to point out, Bechlal, that there are times that what one might call a secondary koyach is even stronger than the primary koyach, and we're going to have 6 such examples. We're going to learn more about how the shaft of the sun or the sun rays, they diffuse in all directions, unlike the shaft of the moon. We're going to have a little bit of Agadata regarding Esther Hamalka and an insight in the understanding of the beginning of Kapitel Chav Beis Lamanatseach Ala Yelas Hashachar. And then the Gemara is going to come back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us that if the Shechita was done too early, prior to the sun, prior to the light in the eastern sky, so then the entire animal is invalidated. So the Gemara is going to add that the same will be regarding Malika and regarding Kemitza. Malika is what we do to a bird, which is similar to Shechita by an animal. Kemitza is the final step that's done to a flower offering that is compared to the Shechita and the Malika. And all of them, if they are done prior to the earliest time, before there is light in the eastern sky, then it invalidates that carbon, and the Gemara is going to push back regarding the kemitza. When you shecht an animal, the animal is geschachten. When you do melika, melika is the way they would sever the head of the bird carbon, in order to have the blood received and put on the mizbeach. When you do malika, you cannot undo malika, but kemitza you can undo. You took off the kemitza, put it back into the what we would call the shirayim, and then do it again at the right time. Why would kemitza prior to the time invalidate the kemitza? So we're going to be speaking a little bit of dinim that we will learn, God willing, in Masechta Menachos, that after you did kemitza, you placed that flour inside a clay shotis. Truth be told, when we'll learn Menachos, we'll speak about clay shotis number 1, clay shotis number 2. Because how do you think, Bachlal, you gather the ingredients together? It's in a clay shotis. But that clay shotis, certainly according to our sugya, does not imbue its contents with kedusha saguf. But when you do the kemitza and put it in what we really should call in the second clay shotis, here we're not going to speak about the first. In the clay shotis, then it imbues the kemitza with kedusha saguf. And indeed, right now, putting it back in is something that you cannot do halachically. But we're going to be speaking about that. We're going to be speaking about placing an item on or in a clay shotis prior to its time. Like, for example, what would happen if the lechem hapanim breads were put on the lechem hapanim prior to the right time? And we will see a difference that sometimes the clay shotis, taka cannot fully sanctify it, but it can sanctify it enough to make it invalid. An interesting step. Ideally, something is becoming sanctified for it to be fit, but there is a concept that it's sanctified enough that now it's susceptible to various invalidations. Now, there are some times that something was put so early, so pre-time on a clay shotis that b'chlal, it will not get any type of kedusha at all, and therefore, in the good way, it won't even become invalidated. That will be a very interesting topic on that Chav Tes Amud Beis. And ultimately, at the bottom of Chav Tes Amud Beis, we're going to come back to the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah made us a statement, and we're going to focus on the latter statement of the Mishnah, that every time a kohen urinated, the kohen then would have to be mekadesh both his hands and his feet, and we'll be speaking about that and some of the sources of nowadays, that when a person relieves oneself, when a person urinates, so they don't make it al natilas yadayim. Right? We make it in the morning, we make it before we wash for bread. What we do make an asher yartzar, some of the sources of that behavior is taka daf Chav Tes Amud Beis and Yoma daf Lamed Amud Aleph. Let's see how far in we will be able to get. Chavra, let us start on daf Chav Ches Amud Beis, towards the end of the second to last line, Amar Rav Nachman. So the Mishnah said that why did they put someone up on the roof? Because there was a time that the moon was coming above the horizon. They were already seeing the rays of the moon, but they erroneously thought it's the rays of the sun. A lot of this will be challenged today. As we'll speak out, we learned that Rambam Kiddush HaChodesh. When do you think exactly does the moonlight come above the horizon shortly before the sunrise? That's only towards the end of the month. Only towards the end of the month. We'll speak more about this soon. And the Mishnah was speaking about Yom Kippur. During Yom Kippur, that never happens. We'll get to that. But they had such a confusion, and the Gemara challenged. They quoted the Rebbe, and Rebbe says that the rays of the moon are so dissimilar to the rays of the sun, no one would make such a mistake. So the answer was that story happened when it was a cloudy day. It wasn't stam a cloudy day. It was clouds, but there were openings in the clouds or cracks in the clouds. Various openings in the clouds. And then when there was light, that is above the clouds or behind the clouds, and it hits the clouds, it so to say spreads. And whenever there's an opening, it enters through the opening. So we, Dalamata, when we're looking up, here is where Taka, you would not differentiate between light from the sun and light and the moon. And they made such a confusion, and they shechted the carbon pre-dawn, pre the earliest time possible. So Amar Rav Nachman, Zohama de Shimsha. So Hama de Shimsha means the oppressive heat of the sun. When the sun is coming to us through openings in the clouds, our kashe, they are even stronger than the heat of the sun that's coming directly from the sun. As we gave those words, that there are sometimes that what one might have thought to be a secondary koyach, as something that is of secondary nature, can be stronger than the primary. And the Gemara says, "V'simanach." Where do we find such a siman? Dana the chala. Rashi teaches when you have a jar of vinegar, and you don't want for the strength of the vinegar to dissipate, so you cover the jar. You don't want the aroma to leave. So all of the power of the vinegar is now trapped in it. If now there is a crack in the jar, so then that crack will release a very powerful aroma, koyach, from the vinegar. If it would have been opened, then it would have been weaker. Now that it was contained and it's seeping its way through a crack, it's even stronger. But the concept of a Baal Tshuva has chela yatir. When you're held back, then when you go forward with greater strength. The same thing is with the sun. Another example, says the Gemara in the last line, Shavrire de Shimsha. Rashi teaches Shavrire means the blindness or the blinding effect. When a person looks at the sun, they're mazik their eyes. So Shavrire de Shimsha, same concept. The Gemara doesn't spell it out. We have to put it in between the lines. That when a person looks at the sun as it goes through the openings in the clouds, the effect, the blinding effect, is kashem shimsham, is even stronger than one who's looking at the sun itself. And v'simanech, dilfa. So what's dilfa? Rashi says dilfa means something that's dripping. Rashi gives the example that if a person enters water, doesn't hurt his body. But if there's one drop of water that's constantly dropping on one part of the body, drop, I think that's a Chinese torture. That is going to be mazik. Same concept is that when the sunlight is contained above the clouds and then it seeps through the cloud, it comes in with greater strength. Another example, another phenomenon. Hirurei avera, thoughts of sin, which one would have categorized as secondary to the sin itself, but from a certain perspective, is kashem avera, is stronger, is more intense, and really more damaging than the sin itself. Rashi says on the top, Hirurei avera, what avera? Taivas nashim, the desire, kashim lahakrish es psarei, yoiser migufei shal maisa. It actually weakens one's flesh more than the act itself. Now, Pi Chasidus, we understand that, we have machshava diberu maisa, and of course, hamaisu hu ha'ikir. But when you're looking at it from a ruchniistic perspective, the thought is closer to the neshama. So if there is a blemish on our thought, it's a more ruchniistic blemish than the blemish of action. Hirur avera is worse than avera. Something which might seem secondary is actually stronger than the primary. Next, and v'simanach reicha de bisra, as Rashi says, that the aroma of roasting meat is extremely disturbing to someone that cannot eat it. So hiruri avera has even a greater effect. Like Rashi says, it weakens the flesh even more, dafke, because it's not being done. Shili de Kaita, says the Gemara, that the end of the summer is Kashya Mekaita. The heat that we experience towards the end of the summer feels stronger than the heat that we experience in the beginning of the summer. And Visimanach, Tanura Shagira, a heated oven. Like Rashi tells us that when you have in the morning, you want to heat up the oven, so then you need a lot of fire, a lot of fuel to make the oven warm. But once the oven was already warm, says Rashi, 3 or a couple of times in the day, now even just a little bit of wood will really fire up the oven again. So towards the end of the summer, since the environment, since the atmosphere is already very hot, so the heat that's coming from the sun, even if it's not as strong as it was coming in the beginning of the summer, will have even a greater effect. Next, Ishta de Sisva, a winter fever is Kashya Midakaita, right? Or the inflammation of the body, let's say, during a winter's fever is more intense than the inflammation of the body. That is, if we're speaking about the inflammation from a summer fever, and here again, Visimanach Tanura Karira, a cold oven. And like Rashi says, that if you have a cold oven, you need a lot of wood to warm it up. So says Rashi that if during the winter, when generally people are cold, if the body is very hot, is arayah that the illness is much stronger. It's that much illness that it made the body become fevered up. Migmar, the last such a phenomena, that Migmar ba'atikta, relearning something old or something already forgotten is harder, kashya mechadata, than acquiring new knowledge. And v'simanach, where do we find that in the world? Tina bartina. If you are making cement from old cement, it's going to be much harder to do that. Masha'inkin, when you make cement for the first time from the raw materials. So learning something for the first time is a lot easier than relearning something old. Especially if you relearned it the first time, not in the best way. You have to relearn it. It should be secondary. It should be easier. It's even harder. I know, but our nature is, Bachlal, that many people love learning something new. And halavai, we should always have that geshmak, that curiosity that God gave us naturally. And most people, once they learned it already, learning it again is something very difficult. Even though when they chazed it, it should take a lot less time, and it's a lot easier. People don't like doing it. And the importance of reviewing everything. So what did we have? So we had the heat that comes through the cloud. We have the blinding effect from the sun that comes through the clouds. We have the thoughts of sin, the end of summer, a winter fever, and relearning the old. Okay, says the Gemara, Amar Rebbe Yabo, my Tama de Rebbe. My Tama de Rebbe means, like we had in the Yerushalmi, Minolon. It's very important to understand that when we learn Torah Shabbal Peh, even if there is a phenomena that can be measured, scientifically, in the Gemara, that's not good enough. So Rebbe made a statement that the shaft, that the rays that come from the sun, they diffuse unless they're held back by the clouds. And from the moon, they come more or less like they are a straight column. They don't diffuse themselves. Whether you see that or not, the Gemara wants to know, where do we have a source for that in the Torah? Or to word it differently, taka, that's the way it is in nature. But since the Torah is the blueprint to the world, so everything that is in nature must be written in the Torah. So my Tama de Rebbe means, where do we find this? So the answer is the Chsiv, and look at the first pasuk of Kapitel Chavbeis and Tehillim, Lamanat Seyach. Lamanat Seyach means to the chief musician. That's one of the expressions when we are singing out a song to God in Tehillim, to the Lamanat Seyach, Al Ayeles HaShachar, about the morning hide. Now, what does that mean? Ma Ayola. Now, even though Ayola, hind, is the female, here we are speaking about the male. Ma Ayola zu karneho mefatzlois lekano lekan, the beautiful horns. They mamish look like branches, and they really branch to one side and to the other side. Af shachar al yeles hashachar, the shachar, or the light of the shachar, not of the sun itself, but the light from the sun. Af shachar zeh is maftzia lekano lekan. The Torah is makish gavaldik, the shachar to the ayola. Amar Abzeira. Now we have a tradition that capital was actually said. The Gemara says that Esther said this. Esther said, because it begins Eli Eli Lama Azaftani, that when Esther was going to Achashverosh to plead for the people, she felt how the Shechina left her. Now the Shechina left her because as she's going to see Achashverosh, she was going through various chambers in which there were many Avodah Zarah. So the Shechina left her. But she needed God to be with her, and when she no longer sensed the presence of the Shechina, so she was the one that said, Keli, Keli, Lama Zaftani, and Lama Natseach Alayela Sashachar, it was Taka, a mizmor that was said by Esther. So now says the Gemara, Lama Nimshla Esther La Ayola. So Loi Malach, Ma Ayola, just like in nature, and now we're speaking about the female hind. Rachmatzar, Pashat Hashem made this animal in a way that her womb is very narrow, and therefore v'chaviva al bailo kol shav v'shah kishar rishayna. Af Esther hoisa chaviva al achashverosh kol shav v'shah kishar rishayna. That's why she is called a hind. Ayala. Now hold on. So that only explains why lama natseyach from Ayelas. Right, so why don't we say from the Ayala? What's the Ayala? Sashachar, Amar Rabbi Yosi, Lama Nimshla Esel Shachar, Loy Malach, Ma Shachar Soif Kol Alayla. Right, Shachar, we're speaking about the first morning lights. That indicates that's the end. It's the end of the night. Af Esther, listen to these words. Af Esther Soif Kol Hanisim. Esther was the end of all the miracles. The Gemara jumps. What are you talking about? Obviously, the Gemara is not speaking about the end of all the miracles. We're speaking about the end of all of, let's say, the celebrated miracles. But Chanukah, so the Gemara says, Soif Kol Hanisa means the end of the miracles that are written in Tanach. Nitna, says the Gemara, Nitna lichtoiv ka'amrinan. We're only speaking about the miracles that were put into Tanach, that were put into Scripture. And indeed, and the final national miracle that we have a record of, that is what we call now Megillas Esther. Now, what we will learn soon in Masechta Megillah, we're not that far away, is indeed, imagine guys, we take it for granted, there's Chav Dalet, Sifrei Kodesh, Emes, we know the whole Seder, there's a Machlokes in the Gemara, whether Megillas Esther is part of Tanach or not. So this statement that Esther is Soif Kol Hanisim, and you're telling me, that means that she's the final miracle that's recorded in Tanach, Chonicha Lamanda Amar, that Esther Nitna Lichtoiv. But Ela Lamanda Amar, guys, this is a Shita Masechta Megillah, that Esther Loi Nitna Lichtoiv, which would mean that Megillas Esther is not part of Tanach. So again, what's the meaning of Esther is Soif Kol Hanisim? So Ma'ika Lameimar, and again, Ma'ika Lameimar meaning, why do we say Alayelas Hashachar? So says the Gemara, that shita moikim law kid Rabbi Yoma ben Yefes in the name of Rabbi Elazar. The Amar Rabbi Yoma ben Yefes, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Lama nimshelu tfilasan shal tzadikim ke'ayeles. It's amazing. We're learning many statements. Yesterday we learned that Salusa of Mincha is called Salusa d'Avram. Shachar, just to know, Shachar means prayer. One of the taiches of Shachar is not morning prayer. So alayeles hashachar. So Ayola Taka means Esther, but not as this specific individual Esther, but as the representative of Tzaddikim. And we're calling all of the prayers of Tzaddikim like Ayelas. Shachar is Tefilla, and Ayelas HaShachar means the Shachar from an Ayelas, referring to all Tzaddikim, Lo Melach Ma Ayolazu, just like a hind. Kolzman Shemagadeles, the older he gets, again, we're speaking about the male, Karneo Maftsilois, right? There's another branch, what's it called in English? An antler, the male Ayola, and it's mamish beautiful. As they grow, the more their horns grow, and it goes another branch and another branch. So Af Tzadikim, we're speaking specifically about prayer, Kolzman Shemarbim B'Tfila, then Tfilas and Nishmas. In other words, they keep on praying. That's also a characteristic of a tzaddik, because some people, they'll daven. Obviously, God doesn't have to say yes the way we want, and people give up. I did my part. Ich hab schon gedaven. A tzaddik goes, he davens, and he davens again, and he davens again, and that's why a tzaddik is called a ayola, because he keeps on praying. And then there comes a point, dafka, because of the ribui hakamus, or because of the insistence, or because of the not giving up, like Moshe Rabbeinu, he davened 515 times. Normally you would say, Genug shai, neshen gebeten. God heard you and God will do what God wants. No, our part is to keep on davening, never to give up. And that's the beauty. Just like the beauty of the antler is that the older it gets, the more branches it has. A song to the chief musician from Tzadikim. And imagine the song of Galus that Keli Keli Lama Azaftani. All right. Ad Moshe. We're coming back to the Mishnah. Right? The Mishnah we had on Daf Chav Ches Amud Aleph. The Mishnah said that Shachatu esatamid, and as we mentioned before we began the third Perek, second Perek wasn't about Yom Kippur. Adarabah, according to many Rishonim, the second Perek was dafka, not about Yom Kippur, because when we subscribe to the Baal Hamoed and the other Rishonim that say that every single thing that was done on Yom Kippur was done dafka by the Kohen Gadol, not only the unique avodas of Yom Kippur, then there was no pious at all on Yom Kippur. But now we're going back into Yom Kippur, and indeed the Mishnah speaks about Hoiridu Kohen Gadol Beis HaTefillah. Now, one line before they brought the Kohen Gadol down to the Beis HaTefillah, the Mishnah says that they made that mistake. They did not go to the roof, and they thought that was sunlight, and it was really moonlight. And v'shachtu asatamid, and then they realized, oy gevalt, we shechted it prior, and that invalidated the. There's no way to rectify it. So the Gemara says, Amos, when did that story happen? If we are still speaking about Stam during the year, then why did the Mishnah say that you bring the Kohen Gadol down to the Beis HaTefillah? And just to make something clear, the Kohen Gadol went down to the Beis HaTefillah before the Shechita. Remember that? Before Shechita. So if you're speaking about Shari Yemais Hashana, why are you mentioning the Kohen Gadol? But Loisagid the Lav Kohen Gadol. The fact that the Mishnah writes in the next line after the story that Hoiridu Kohen Gadol Beis HaTefillah L'Chayra, we're speaking here about that which happened on Yom Kippur. And indeed, we're not speaking here about a pious, we're speaking about how did the Kohen Gadol know that you can shech the animal. So they made the system that someone has to go to the roof and there's this whole conversation, what you ask him, what he responds. But if this story happened on Yom Kippur, then it doesn't work. Guys, it's very simple. You'll notice it. At the end of the month, the moon, like from our perspective, everything is going from east to west. Towards the end of the month, the moon is a little bit ahead of the sun. So there's going to be moonrise and sunrise. That is at the end of the month. What happens during the change from the old month into the new month, by the new month, the sun is running ahead of the moon. That's why you'll always notice that in the beginning of the month, the moon is very little. That's why you can't see it when the sun is up. But when the sun goes down, the moon is going to be almost going down. What's in the beginning of the month, from our perspective, when we're looking at east to west, the sun is ahead of the moon. When is the moon ahead of the sun, which is a story of the Mishnah? The moon came up, and they thought that means it must have been shortly before the sunlight would be coming up. It wasn't a few hours off. They never would have thought that this is the sunlight when they know it's not shaykh. So it must have been towards the end of the month. I'm sorry, towards the end of the month. A great picture here of the Chacham. Now, if you want to know what the moon looks like, look at the Zoom. How's that picture of the moon? So this couldn't have happened on Yom Kippur. Great question. So Gemara says, Hachika Amar, Ubiyoim Hakipurim. Indeed, the story did not happen on Yom Kippur. Couldn't have happened. Yom Kippur is the 10th of the month. Story happened on Yom Chavtes. It happened mamash at the end of the month. The Mishnah just says, going back to the beginning, we spoke about this conversation that happened, Shari Yemais Hashana. The story, the mistake happened, Shari Yemais Hashana. So now we're going back into Yom Kippur. So on Yom Kippur, Ki Omar Barak Bar Koi, when the code word was said, and that's going to be the first shita that we learned yesterday, Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, not even the Ola Bar Koi from Rabbi Akiva, but Barak Bar Koi. So then, Hoiridu Kohen Gadol Beis HaTefillah. Okay, very good. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam v'shar kol yom. So now, still, the Gemara is not going to go to Yom Kippur yet. We get that. But we want to just think about this concept of we invalidated the carbon because it was done before the correct time. Tana Avuy de Rav. The father of Rabbi Yavin had a braisa, and he taught it to everyone. And these are the words of his braisa. That lo yizu bulvad amru. It's not only if the shechita was done at night even if it was done a minute before the Zman, if it's not yet Barak Barkoi, it's completely invalidated, even b'di'evid, and therefore it has to get burned. So says the Braisa, Ela af milika so'oif, if milika is done before the Barak Barkoi, if a kemitza is done, right, what halacha will call by night, so the din will be is tisareif. We learned that in the Azara area, there was a fireplace, and all of the karbanos that are in the category of kachim kachim, that if the animal would have been valid, it needed to be burnt and eaten in the Azara, in Machna Shechina. So when it became invalidated, it needed to be burned, remember that, in Machna Shechina. The kachim kalam karbanos, that if the carbon would have been kosher, you could take it out and eat it, let's say, in Yerushalayim, then you don't have to burn it in Machna Shechina. So without those details, the nakuda is that shchita, which is done to an animal, the kemitza that's done to a bird, the milika that's done to a bird, and the kemitza that's done to a mincha all share the same rule. If you did that step a second too early, it's completely invalidated. And now the Gemara is going to ask the last line. Hold on, bishleima oila so'oif, right? Milika, we get that. Maida hava hava. Maida hava hava is an expression that we say it's too late. It happened already. What should we do? Certain things are final. It cannot be reversed. But Ella Koimetz, so what that they remove the kemitza, which is the kohen putting his hand into the original bowl, and him removing the amount of flour mixed with oil. And every mincha, there were so many different menachos, right? The 5 general menachos and how they were pre-prepared, but he would scoop it up. Kemitza means a scoop with the index, middle, and ring finger. And then he would place that in a special bowl that would be used to walk it over and take it to the Mizbeach and burn it. Mela, the kohen, he shouldn't have done it at night. So what? Nahadra. Let the kohen return the kemitza to the original pan. To what? To the rest of the mincha, which normally we would call shirayim. And then wait until it's the right time. Simple kash. So that was the question that the father of Rebbe Yovan asked when he taught the Braisa, and he himself understood the answer. So the Gemara says, Hu Tanila? Abu of the Rebbe Yovan learned the Braisa, and he also explained it. And that's a very important rule. And the rule is, Klei Shadis Mikachin Afilu Shaloi Bizmanai. Guys, these are the rules. Once something is imbued with what we will call Kedusha Saguf, once something was made fit to be burnt on the altar, and for that, just doing the kemitza is not enough. You have to put it, in Menachos, we will call this in the second Klei Shadis. Here, we're not going to even call it the second because we're not even focusing on the first. Once it's put after the kemitza in the Klei Shadis, it's imbued with Kedusha Saguf. Once something is imbued with Kedusha Saguf, it's called, Kodesh Lamizbeach. The everything else is what is called Shirayim. Everything else has a lower level of Kedusha. True, the mincha is not eaten by the owners. A mincha is going to be eaten by the Baal, by the Kahanim. But it's in a whole different category. They are halachically different. Putting it back together doesn't resolve anything. It doesn't go back to the tevel that it was before. It's like when you mix Truma and Chulin, you didn't resolve anything. You made a big balagan. So you may not do it. Now there's a chiddush here. What is the chiddush? Because one might have argued, if the kemitza is going to become imbued with kedusha saguf, then you can't go back. But why would it become imbued with kedusha saguf if it was placed in the klei shadis shaloi bizmanoi? It happened when it was still night. Why don't we say, since an action was done when Hashem did not want it to be done, the klei shadis won't be mekadesh it? If we would have looked at it that way, then this answer would not have worked. So fakir, that is what the father of Rebbe Yovan is saying. What the Braisa is being mekadesh, that a klei shadis is mekadesh the kibitza, even though it was put there shaloi bizmanoi, which is great. However, on that we have a problem. Meisvei, it says in a Braisa, zeh haklal. Now the Braisa is actually addressing this question. If I take an article and I put it in a klei shadis, will the kedusha that the klei shadis normally will invest in the item in it, What happens if it was done shaloi b'zmani? Does it become mukdash? So it says the Braisa that kol hakorev bayoim. Rashi 4 lines on top of the Amid speaks about all the menachas, the levoina in the bazia, blood in the mizrak, right? The ketoides that's put all of the avodas that are to be done during the day. Then kadosh bayoim, they only become sanctified at day. Clearly, v'chol hakorev balayla, something that can be brought on the mizbeach, something that can be offered on the Mizbeach at night, that can become sanctified at night. What is put on the Mizbeach at night? So aside of the chalavim and avarim, but there we learned this in the last Perek, they're not put in the klei sharis, even though the kirbayim was, but the Mishnah did not mention it. But let's go to any minchas nesachim. When you have a korban like an oila, like a shlamim, almost all of them comes along with secondary gifts, flour and wine. Yeah, korbanis have to be brought during the day. But if you have a minchas nesachim korban, and by the way, when it comes to a flour secondary complementary offering that comes together with an animal korban, if you remember this in Menachos, there is no kemitza done to it. Minchas nesachim, like the mincha of a kohen, all of it is burnt on the mizbeach. So if an animal was slaughtered that day, obviously it's better. Do everything ASAP. But if you did not bring the mincha a day, you can bring that mincha at night. It may be offered at night. So that's one of the examples that we're focusing on. So something that might be offered at night, it will become sanctified at night. That means if you put it in the second klisharis, if you put it in the klisharis that will be used to bring it up on the mizbeach, only then will it become imbued with kedusha. Now there's a third category in this braisa that, at least if we're going to follow the Hagos Maharav Ranchenberg, he's not going to sit. I'll just read it inside. V'chol hakorev bein bayoim bein balayla, kodesh bein bayoim bein alayla. So says the Hagos Maharav Ranchenberg that this last category is actually the minchas nesachim that we were just speaking about. In other words, the second and the third is speaking about the same. So it's either the braisa says kol hakorev bayoim kodesh bayoim v'chol hakorev balayla kodesh balayla, or the braisa says kol hakodesh bayoim kodesh bayoim v'chol hakorev bein bayoim bein balayla kodesh bein bayoim bein balayla. Be that as it may, the braisa is telling us clearly that only something that may be brought up at night will become imbued with kedushas haguf when you put it in the klisharas at night. And emes, again, minchas nesachim can be brought at night. But you know what, my friends? A kemitza may never be brought at night. Kemitza is like the dam. Once it's shkia, you that's it. You can't bring it anymore. So what that they put it in a klei sharis? So what? It should not have affected any additional kedusha. If it's not more mugdash, if there's no kedusha saguf, so we're back to the question on top of the Amid. Why is it maida hava? Take that kemitza, put it back with its source, with what normally would have been called shirayim, remix it or not, just put it together and do the kemitza at day. Meaning, and kol hakorev bayoim is referring to a mincha from which you take a kemitza, and the braisa means to say bayoim in and balayla no. So we're back to the kasha. Let's call this a nocturnal kemitza. Why is it invalidated? It's not holy. It's the way it was before. So says the Gemara, guys, these things are klalim. This is a gewaldige klal. It's not choil kodesh, relative. It's not, does it have kedusha saguf, yes or no. Many things are not yes and no's. It's graded. So there is a concept of something that has no kedusha saguf. There is the other extreme, Lamal Yusa, it's mamish kadosh likarev. You can put it now in the mizbeach, but there is an in-between. Since you put it in a klei sharis at night, it doesn't have enough kedusha saguf for you to be allowed to put it on the mizbeach. But on the other hand, it is in a klei sharis. It did receive some level of kedusha saguf, and we're calling it has enough kedusha for it to become possible. It's amazing. Certain things either do it or don't do it. Doing it a little bit ruins it. So the Braisa is speaking about the kedusha likarev, but there is, even when it's not mugdash likarev, because it's a korban, it's a mincha that should have been done at day. If you put it in a klei sharis, it's enough kadosh li pasel. Says the Gemara, Dilma, indeed, ain't a kadosh li karev, avol kadosh li pasel. And let's go, what type of invalidation? So Rashi, 14 lines from the top of the Amud, it's more or less on the same height here on the left side. Avol, right, li karev, li yaskasha li karev. This, well, you can't put it on the Mizbeach, but you put it in a Klei Shadas. Avol kadosh liyos muchshar ba'oisa kedusha. It did get a additional level of holiness. Lipasel b'tful yom. If a tful yom touched it, now it will become invalid. Or if a mechuser kipurim im nagaboy, now it will become invalid. Or ubiyoytze im yotza. Right? If you take it outside the compounds of the temple, prior to you putting it in this Klei Shadas, it didn't have any kedusha saguf. So therefore, it wasn't susceptible to any of these invalidations. Now it's susceptible. Or ubelina, which is what we're talking about. Belina means once something has kedusha saguf, then once it's overnighted, the next morning, by the fact that it's the new day, it automatically became possible. It's called psul lina. If you would not have put it in the Klei Shadas, then there is no kedusha saguf. It would not become psul lina. So it means if you prepare the mincha today, you can use it tomorrow. So what that you prepared it today or yesterday? It's maybe not ideal. It's not lo mashcha. It's not the freshest. But the moment it has kedusha saguf, then the time clock is ticking. Imlon. Vizur, says Rashi, what happens? Gam yi nifselas belina. Now we're getting more oisius. So if someone did the kemitz at night, you put it in the Klei Shadas, it's not Kaddish Likarev, but it's worse. Now it's already holy. It's holy enough that the moment the Zman comes about, which is the morning, it's already invalidated. Psulina. I'll give you an example by Kedushin, by marriage. So actually the word Mikodeshes, right? Kedushin. They're not allowed to be together. They're not married yet. But she's married enough that she cannot be with another man. If she's with another man, it's adultery. There's grades. So Gavaldik. So the Braisa is speaking about Kadosh Li Karev, and nevertheless it is Kadosh Li Pasel, which is why the Braisa makes a lot of sense. If you did the Kemitza, meaning placing it in the Klei Shadas before this man, now it's holy enough. The moment this man comes, boom, it became invalidated because of Lina. Back inside the Gemara, we're not done yet. Frek the Gemara, Azoi. You're telling me that there's such a concept that something is kadosh li pasel. I got a problem with the Mishnah. Masav Rab Zeira. This is a Mishnah Menaches. Guys, when do we put the lechem upon him on the shulchan? We put it on Shabbos. Not only do we put the new 12 loaves, right, 6 and 6 on Shabbos, but we remove the old. We remove the 2 old bazichen, spoons of frankincense. That levoina is put on the mizbeach. We learned about that in the last Perek. And now we are allowed to be machalek the lechem apanims, which we also spoke about in Yoma, exactly how it worked. How many did you divide? Did you divide 6 and 6 for the Mishmar HaNichnas and Mishnah Haba, the incoming Mishmar, the outgoing Mishmar, and with all of the beautiful details. Now, in order for you to be allowed to offer the levoina on the mizbeach, it needed to sit on the shulchan for 7 days. If it wasn't there for the entire week, then you cannot put it on the mizbeach. If you cannot put the bazichen on the mizbeach, if the avoida of offering the levoina is not going to be a kosher avoida, so then no one can eat the lechem upon. So says the Mishnah, what happens if siddur es halechem es habazichen achar haShabbos? Instead of putting it on the table Shabbos Kodesh, they put it on Sunday. Which means that when it came to the next week and they removed the old by putting on the new, the old wasn't there for a full 7 days. It was only on there for 6 days. And even though they offered the bozichen on Shabbos. But that bozichen was not valid because it wasn't first on the table for a full week. And we're going to go now with the girsa that we will change later. Lefita l'shetas Rashi, psula, the bread is pasul. These words, Rashi says we have to take out. Well, let's begin reading over here. Now we have the same problem. So one second. And then the Mishnah says, so Ketzad Yaseh. So what should you do? That's a great practical question. In other words, for whatever reason, they did not put the lechem apanim breads on Shabbos. It's Sunday. Now, you're supposed to leave it on there until next week. But if you're going to leave it on only for 6 days, you're telling me, then again, the levaina is not allowed to be offered because it wasn't sitting on the table for a week. And if the avoida of the levaina, which is like the kemitza, is not kosher, so then the shanayim, which is the 12 loaves, cannot be eaten. So ketzad yaseh. So you leave it for 13 days. No, you put it on the table, you can't take it off next Shabbos because it's only 6 days. So the Mishnah says, Yanechenu l'Shabbos haba. Leave it for another week, right? Because in other words, it has to be there for 7 days. But the Mishnah says it's not pshat that if it's on there for more than 7 days, it's a problem. It's not a problem. End of Mishnah. So a simple solution. So that week you didn't bake extra breads. And then the second Shabbos, take off the bozichen, offer the bozichen, and then you can divide and consume as God wants the lechem apanim breads. Now we got a problem. What is our problem? Amai tigdoish v'tipasel. It should become invalidated. Why would it become invalidated? Guys, look inside the Rashi. 4 lines under the Gemara. The shulchan is a klei sharis. When you put it on there, says Rashi, kiven de klei sharis mikachin even shaloi b'zman li pasel, based on the answer that we said. Not that since you put it on there too early, it's garnished. No, it does invest the item in it with enough kedusha that it can become possible. So therefore asks, and therefore the kaddish hashulchan esalechem may echad b'Shabbos. So therefore you put it on there on Sunday. So Rashi is asking, just like we are learning over here, that when you put something in a klei sharis, shaloi b'zmanai, you invalidated it, which is what happened over here. Well, you put it shaloi b'zmanai. You're supposed to put it on Shabbos, and you put it on Sunday. That in itself should invalidate it. Now you can go into more details. Maybe it noch means there should be a psulina. In other words, what's a psulina? That since God says that it should be there for 7 days, so once it's there for more than 7 days, then you got a problem. Then it's lina. Why isn't there lina over here? The answer must be because since you put it on Sunday, it doesn't count. It only starts counting from Shabbos. It doesn't even count to give it a little bit of kedusha to make it possible. That goes against the principle that we're learning. So says the Gemara, Amar Rava, listen here. Man the komoisiv shapa komoisiv. Your question from Tanach is a great question because it's a Mishnah. But don't forget that we are not refuting an Amoida, which is easier. So there's a Mishnah. The Amoida made a statement, refuted. We can't say that. Because the father of Rabbi Yavin was not giving his own din. He was explaining a Braisa. The Braisa is Oichet Atana. But the Avud Rabbi Yavin, it's not his own Torah. Namo Masnisan Ka'amar. He was explaining the Braisa. So therefore, and the only way to explain the Braisa, which says that if you made the Kemitza at night, it's mamish like shechting it at night, you must accept the rule that the father of Rabbi Yavin just gave the words, that there's a concept that even when something is done shaloi b'zmanoi, nevertheless, it becomes holy li pasel. That also is emes. However, listen to this chap, says Rava, what will be the difference between our case of Kemitza versus the case of Lechem Apanim? Vekosavar laila ein mechusar zman. What happened in the case of Kemitza? You put it too early, but when did you put it too early? You put it the night prior. It can be even one moment prior, but it's still Laila. Guys, let's not forget that in Yiddishkeit, a day begins with the night prior. You were not that off. You were off, but you were not completely off. It happens to be that in the Beis HaMikdash, there, halaylo hilachachar hayom. But when you put it in the klei sharis at night, it's not that you put it, let's say today is Monday, right? It says, Rava, if someone would have made the Kemitza and he would have put it Sunday, it's a terrible example because then you have to bring it on Sunday. But if it would have been for something that has to be done on Monday, then it would be nothing. Premature Zman, if it's done completely in a different Zman, Ataka doesn't even invest it with any Kedusha, which is the case of the Lechem Apanim. The case of the Braisa is the Kemitza was done the night prior. The night prior, Laila, is not considered a full premature And therefore, yes, it does imbue it with some kedusha, not likarav but lipasel. But yoim b'chusar zman, since you're supposed to put this on Shabbos, when did they put it? Actually, they put it a day late. Put it on Sunday. It's so off, it's nothing. That means until the next Shabbos, it's as if it wasn't on a Klei Shabbos at all. When does the count begin? On the next Shabbos. That's exactly what the Mishnah says. What's Sunday to Shabbos is garnished. Now you have from Shabbos to the next Shabbos, you have the 7 days. But we got a problem. The problem is, but now that you're telling me that I get it a whole day prior, that type of you got it on the wrong time is completely ineffective. But the night before the day, even in the Beis Hamikdash, even though in the Beis Hamikdash, the night goes after the day, but the night prior has some chashivus. Oh, so we're close enough to ruin it. So hold on, when you put the lechem upon breads, Sunday, so Sunday is nothing, Monday is nothing, but Friday night, now when are you taking it off? You're taking it off not Friday night, you're taking it off Shabbos day. So again, it's psulina. It's supposed to be there for 7 days. Now you added another 12 hours. It shouldn't have been there for the other 12 hours. That's a big kasha. So for that, the Gemara gives 2 answers. Answer number 1, Omar Avinu Zadoichik. He says it must be shekadam v'silkoi. You're right. You know when the Mishnah says that ma yaseh, leave it on the table and then just take it off in the following Shabbos, you must remove it before Shabbos. You leave it on the table. Where are you going to leave it? You leave it on the table. You take it off the table. And then you put it back on the table Shabbos day. Now you understand how, this is a doichik. So Marzutra or Vitemer Ravashi says no. Afilu tema b'shaloi kadam v'silkoi. Listen to these words. Kiven shesidroi shaloi kimitzvasai. When did the kohen put it on the shulchan? On Sunday. When do we say that a klei shabbos has the power to be mekadesh something enough to passel it, even though it wasn't the night prior? That's when you put it in there on the night prior. If you put it on the table Sunday, which is a full day, a full 6 days prior, you're completely shaloi b'zmanoi, that act of placement is nothing. And the expression in the Gemara is kamoish sidroi hakoif. If a monkey puts it on the table, it's not about it being on the table. What's mekadesh it is by the fact that it was placed on the table. The placement on Sunday is nothing. So even though now that you placed it, it's still on the table Friday night, it doesn't have any significance. And therefore it does not get invested with any kedusha. Amazing. Now there's so many pratim that you have to go through to the Gemara. So hold on, so why is it b'chal valid? Doesn't mean that at least Shabbos day you have to pick it up and put it back down. But with the focus, I'm going to focus just to speak one word over here. And that is what Rashi says. Oy bazoi. If that's the case, let's go back to the beginning of the Mishnah. Just go up on the Amid. When the Mishnah says that if a person put the lechem in the bazichim, achar Shabbos means on Sunday or on Monday, whatever. So the Mishnah says, and then on the next Shabbos, the closest Shabbos, the kohen didn't know, and they offered the bazichim. So says psula. It must be, says Rashi, according to Rav Ashi's understanding, he did not have the word psula. Because one thing is clear, that if placing it on the table by shaloi b'zmanoi is as if it was never placed, if it was as if it was never placed, no one should have brought the bazichim. That was a sin. They didn't avoid the psula. But that would never invalidate the lechem apanims. Like, let me ask you a question. If you have lechem apanim in the freezer, and a kohen brings the bazichim, why would it affect the lechem apanim? It won't. It will never become invalidated. Now, that's a very big statement because we are so careful not to change the girsa in a Mishnah, but Rashi concludes that it must be that the word psul is not there. And there's so many, this idea is so important. I would just speak about the simple thing. Many people struggle to come on time. And they have to be told, that was what we learned yesterday, daven, zrizin magdim mitzvahs. Same thing with Avraham Avinu. But for people that either beteva or from a good avoida, that they make an effort to come on time, to understand that just like coming late, you came in the wrong time, coming early is you came at the wrong time. Coming early is also not good. Think about what we're talking about. They were zrizin, they want to do the mitzvah. They want to shecht it this first moment. You can't do it before this man. You do it before the Zman, you invalidated something. You are Mekadeshit, Bishalik, but you're puzzle. No, Azman is Azman, both sides of the coin. That is the bigger picture. But then all of these details are mamish beautiful. Okay, let's go weiter. Let's go into Natilas Yadayim. So the Mishnah says 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, Zeh Haklal Hoyib HaMikdash. Just finish. When people come to shul and they start late, some people can't take that. Why did you start late? But I want to tell you something. When the minyan starts early, it also makes many people upset. Like, start at the right time. Okay, Zeh Haklal Hoyib HaMikdash. That what? So the Mishnah spoke about if someone, the Lashon Nikiya, the Mishnah uses the Lashon Hamesach Esraglov. Literally, it means when you cover your feet, because when they would have a bowel movement, they didn't have toilet seats the way we have, the Grace Knackers today. They would have to crouch down, the way it's still done Mistam in India and in China and in some places in Brazil. So that's the Lashon. Hamesach Esraglov, you have to go to the mikvah. That's any time during any kohen that needed to have a bowel movement afterwards, mikvah. Every time the Mishnah says, kol hametel mayim, that's what the Gemara is focusing on. A person urinates. So in the Beis Hamikdash, that kohen needed to be makadesh, his hands and his feet. So we learn about the kiyur. We already learned about the upgrade they made to the kiyur, that it had the 12 spouts. You have to go back to the kiyur and you have to be mekadesh yadav v'raglov, and that's what we're going to focus on. Says the Gemara, Herzechayim. The reason why you have to be mekadesh raglov bishloime raglayim, why mishum netzoitzos? Netzoitzos is that when a person urinates, they're on the ground. So netzoitzos means sparks, but it means droplets. So droplets of urine will, I think the word is ricochet. It's going to bounce back on the person's legs. And therefore his feet became, so to say, soiled. So you have to wash your feet. You have to be mekadosh yad eliyodayim. If a person urinates, b'chlal, why do they have to wash their hands? So Amar Rabbi Abba zoy meres, the way some Rishonim learn, we'll read soon the Tosfos Yishanim, that taka, if a person urinates and their hands don't get soiled with urine, you don't have to wash your hands. But since for sure the kohen's hands will become soiled with urine, mitzvah l'shafshef, because there is an obligation to rub off with one's hands the netzoitzoids, the droplets of urine on one's feet. So we're taking it as a given that there's going to be netzoitzes. That's different. We learn in Shulchan Aruch, we learned in some brachas that if there is a heel that goes down, that's the best place to urinate, never to have netzoitzes to begin with. But it's that important. If there's anything on your feet, says Rashi, nach Rashi's girsa wasn't just mitzvah lafashvesh. Rashi says mitzvah lafashvesh biyadoi. What are you rubbing off? Netzoitzes shalmei raglayim. Hanitzem al raglov. Why? Shelo yetze b'hen chutz. A person should not walk outside when he still has droplets of urine on his feet, and he's going to look like someone whose member is severed. A person whose member is severed won't be able, when urine leaves the body, it like arches away from the body. If a person's member is severed, then the urine stream will not make that arch. Therefore, it's going to fall on his feet. But so what? So let's read it inside the Gemara. You're not allowed to go out with these droplets on your feet. People will think that you have some sort of blemish. You have a cut member, which is why there's urine on your feet. But the problem is a person that has that blemish is unable to father children. And therefore people will think that the children don't belong to him. He's married, which means that, God forbid, they'll be choishish that his children are mamzerim. People will think that he's impotent. Okay. Now, what is that coming from this Gemara? That why are you washing your hands? You're washing your hands because mitzvah lefashvesh biyadoi, which l'chu'ura implies that if you would not need to be meshafshev biyadoi, then you don't need to wash your hands. Where is this negea, guys? On Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, B'chal, one of the 5 Yinuim is not to wash ourselves with water, right? When a person goes to the restroom on Yom Kippur, right? So Nachat says that some urine should go on one's hand to justify the washing of the hand. That's connected to our sugya. Look inside the Tosfos Yishanim regarding brachas. Mitzvah lefashvesh, it's all the way underneath by me. Omer Rabbeinu Tam, ki mikan yesh lilmoid, shahanichnos lahashtin mayim, Ein tzarech litol yadav imlei fishveish. Number one. Number two, va'af shif sheif, even if a person did end up with some urine droplets on one's hands, miya nira, this is the Rabbeinu Tam, that the ein tzarech levarech al netilas yadayim. One is connected to the other. If when you urinate, you have to wash your hands regardless, so then you have to make a bracha al netilas yadayim. Now that we are saying that for that bodily movement, that doesn't bring any tumah to your hands. Why are you washing hands? Because you touched urine. So what happens if I touch someone else's schmutz? I don't have to make an al netilas yadayim, I have to wash my hands off. But since the washing of the hands is only because your hands became soiled, so even if your hands became soiled, you're not mechuyev to make al netilas yadayim. The midah dahava, it's gavaldik. Anegel yodav b'mokar mati noifes. And by the way, that explains, we make an asher yatzar and birchas hashachar, not asher al netilas yadayim. Before we eat bread, we have to wash our hands, so we make a bracha al netilas yadayim. Based on the fact that there is no inherent obligation to wash your hands, that's why we don't make the bracha al netilas yadayim. Now Rabbeinu Tam goes weiter, and he says, "Vafilu asher yatzar lo hoy Rabbeinu Meir ragel levarech." After urinating. However, here he brings the other sheet. The Rebbe, we learned that yesterday, right, or 2 days ago, in the Tosfos Yeshanim, a Rishon called Rebbe. Ach Rebbe, Ragel Levarach Asher Yatzar. It won't stop us. We have a Machlekes Rishonim, and when a person goes to the bathroom, even if it's only Hametel, even if a person is Hametel Mayim, we will make the bracha of Asher Yatzar, which is the greatest miracle that we should in Taka appreciate, how everything functions. And we are able to relieve ourselves. Shataka be a bracha to refuah shalema to Mia, Miriam, Bas, Chayim, Michal, and all the Yidden that are having hard times with these bodily movements. Guys, I'm going to just run up to close my camera. I lost my connection to my camera, but I'm coming right back.
Bye.
Both guys.
I wonder how many times you're allowed to say Al Yatiyas Yadayim during the daytime.
We say once when we wake up, and we say it before we wash for bread, and that's it. But now we have the answer. People can ask, why didn't you say Al Netilas Yadayim after we went to the bathroom? And the answer would be that if I would be obligated to wash my hands regardless, then I would be obligated to say Al Netilas Yadayim if I'm obligated to wash my hands. We're learning that I'm not obligated to wash my hands because I had a bodily movement. I'm only saying it because if my hands became soiled. So if I touch any dirt and I have to wash my hands, I don't make a bracha al netilas yadayim. I just wash my hands.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Rabbi.
Yes.
What can you give me the taich of laws, motzi laws?
You want to know the exact meaning of the word laws?
Yeah.
The word laz is an abbreviation for Lashon Am Zara. The word laz are words from a foreign nation. In other words, just this mindset of jumping by saying, aha, this guy is impotent and his kids are mamzedim, that's not something that we advocate, this mindset. It's a foreign mindset. Nevertheless, since people think that way, some of our behaviors have to be based on how will it be perceived. We're not saying that we should live our whole lives only based on how other people perceive us, but we have to also take that into account. And sometimes, especially when it comes to people maybe suspecting that one's children are halachic mamzedim, these are very unhealthy ways of thinking that we have to take into account. And when we could, make sure that we don't give any appearance that will justify others thinking that way.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Some people say, why do I care what other people think? Just because they're meshuga. Sometimes we say that, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes we have to think how it is looked at.